My daughter's funeral was held in secret. Her husband did not allow me to say goodbye to her. Only the closest people, he said coldly, as if I, her father, were a stranger. A month later, he sent me a message. When will you pay the mortgage? I replied, I forgot to tell you. Before we continue, please subscribe to the channel and write in the comments what time it is where you are now. The photograph trembled between my weathered fingers. Sarah, at 8 years old, gap-toothed grin stretched wide as she clutched her birthday cake. February morning light filtered through my kitchen window, casting shadows across the scattered memories spread over my worn table. Steam rose from my coffee mug, warming the silence of my Brightmoor house. 47 years I'd lived in this place, watched the neighborhood change, watched my children grow up running these cracked sidewalks. Now at 65, mornings like these belong to me and my ghosts. The phone's shrill ring shattered the peace. I glanced at the clock, 7:30. Too early for telemarketers, too late for emergencies. My hand reached reluctantly for the receiver, expecting another recorded message about my car warranty. Lloyd Diaz speaking. Sobbing filled the line. Raw, broken sounds that made my chest tighten. Dad? Karen's voice cracked like thin ice. Dad, I need to tell you something terrible. The coffee mug slipped from my fingers. Hot liquid splashed across the table, seeping into Sarah's birthday photo, distorting her bright smile into ripples of brown stain. I watched the coffee spread, paralyzed by the agony in my daughter's voice. What happened, baby girl? What's wrong? Sarah. Karen choked on the name. She died last night at the hospital. The cancer spread to all her organs. She's gone, Dad. The words hit like physical blows. My legs gave way, forcing me to grip the table edge as the room tilted sideways. Coffee dripped steadily onto the linoleum floor. Drip, 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 each drop marking time in this new reality where my youngest daughter no longer existed. What? The word came out strangled. How did she die? When did this happen? Why didn't anyone tell me? Outside, Detroit was waking up. A dog barked somewhere down the street. Traffic hummed on Grand River Avenue. Normal sounds for a normal morning, but nothing would ever be normal again. The doctors said it happened fast, Karen whispered. She went peacefully in her sleep. Where's Nicholas? He should have called me himself. Where is he? Silence stretched between us, heavy with unspoken things. The radiator hummed in the corner, filling the void with mechanical breathing. He said he'd call you, Karen finally managed. He promised he would. My hand shook as I reached for more photos, needing to touch something real. Sarah's high school graduation, Sarah's wedding day, radiant in white lace. Sarah, holding her first paycheck, so proud to be supporting herself. Where's the funeral? When? I need to make arrangements. I need to... Dad, Karen's voice dropped to barely a whisper. You need to talk to Nicholas about that. Something cold crawled up my spine. Why couldn't she just tell me when the service was? Why did everything have to go through my son-in-law? Put him on the phone then, right now. He's not here. Dad, I'm so sorry. I know how much you loved her. Loved, past tense, as if my love for Sarah had died with her body. I stood up, nearly knocking over my chair. My bare feet found the puddle of coffee, the liquid cold against my skin. The whole kitchen smelled like bitter grounds and grief. Give me his number. I need to talk to him immediately. You have his number, Dad. Listen, I have to go. There's so much to handle right now. The dial tone buzzed in my ear like an angry wasp. My fingers fumbled through my address book, pages yellowed and soft from years of use. Nicholas Thompson. The man who'd married my daughter, who'd promised to love and protect her. The man who should have called me the moment Sarah took her last breath. I dialed with trembling hands. Ring, 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 voicemail. I tried again and again. Each ring felt like another betrayal, another moment stolen from my chance to say goodbye. The coffee-stained photograph of Sarah's 8th birthday stared up at me from the table. Her eyes seemed to ask why I hadn't been there when she needed me most. I grabbed my coat from the back door hook and snatched my keys from the counter. The old pickup truck waited in the driveway, faithful as always. Whatever was happening, whatever Nicholas was hiding from me, I'd get answers face to face. The engine turned over with a reluctant growl, and I backed out onto the empty street. Grosse Pointe was 40 minutes away if traffic cooperated. 40 minutes to figure out what to say to the man who'd let my daughter die without her father beside her. My pickup truck looked like a wounded animal parked between Nicholas's BMW and his neighbor's Mercedes. The pristine sidewalks of Grosse Pointe stretched before me like an accusation. Manicured lawns, perfect hedges, and houses that cost more than I'd made in my entire working life. The drive had taken 43 minutes through morning traffic, 43 minutes of my mind spinning between grief and growing anger. My hands still trembled as I walked up the stone pathway to Nicholas's front door, still wearing the hastily thrown-on clothes I'd grabbed in my rush to leave. Everything here looked untouched by tragedy. No black ribbons, no flowers, no signs that death had visited this perfect suburban street. I knocked firmly on the oak door, waited, knocked again, harder this time. Footsteps approached from inside, casual and unhurried. The door opened to reveal Nicholas in expensive loungewear, silk pajama pants, and a cashmere robe that probably cost more than my monthly grocery bill. He held a coffee mug in one hand, steam rising from whatever premium blend he preferred. His expression shifted from mild annoyance to barely concealed irritation when he saw me. "Lloyd, what are you doing here?" No grief in his voice, no red-rimmed eyes or hollow cheeks from sleepless nights. He looked like a man who'd slept peacefully, while his wife lay dying in a hospital bed. "Nicholas, when is Sarah's funeral? I need to know all the details." He stepped forward slightly, filling the doorframe with his body, not inviting me in, not even offering condolences for my loss, just blocking my view of the interior like I was some unwelcome solicitor. "The funeral was yesterday, Lloyd. We buried her at Elmwood Cemetery." The words hit me like a physical punch. Yesterday, while I'd been sitting in my kitchen, drinking coffee and remembering birthdays that would never come again, they'd put my daughter in the ground. "What are you saying? Yesterday? Without me?" Behind him, I caught glimpses of the living room. No flowers, no sympathy cards, no photographs of Sarah displayed in memoriam. The house looked exactly as it always did, cold, modern, untouched by human emotion. "Only the closest people were there," Nicholas said, his tone matter-of-fact as if discussing the weather. "We didn't want to make it a circus." The blood rushed to my face. "A circus? That's my daughter? How could you not tell me?" A neighbor across the street had come out to collect her morning paper, but her eyes were fixed on our conversation. In this neighborhood, raised voices probably counted as major entertainment. "Sarah didn't want drama," Nicholas replied, each word calculated to wound. "She knew you'd turn it into a show." My daughter, my Sarah, who used to call me every Sunday just to hear my voice, who brought her friends to my house because she said I told the best stories, that Sarah supposedly didn't want her father at her funeral. "You're lying." The accusation came out raw, unpolished. "She would have wanted me there." Nicholas's grip tightened on his coffee mug. Something flickered across his face. Not guilt exactly, but a nervous energy that suggested he wasn't as comfortable with this cruelty as he pretended to be. "Believe whatever makes you feel better, Lloyd." But she made her wishes clear. More neighbors had appeared now. An elderly man watering plants that didn't need watering. A woman walking her small dog in deliberate circles. All watching the scene unfold on Nicholas's doorstep. This breakdown of propriety in their orderly world. "Where are her things?" I demanded, trying to peer around his shoulder into the house. "Her photos? Her clothes? Why aren't there any signs of mourning here?" "This is my house, Lloyd." His voice carried a new edge now, territorial and defensive. "I decide what happens here." The way he said "my house" struck something deep in my memory. My house, not our house, not the home he'd shared with my daughter. His possession, his kingdom where he made all the rules. "Your house?" The pieces started clicking together in my mind. "Who's been paying the mortgage for 3 years?" Nicholas pulled the door closer to his body, creating an even smaller gap between us. "That's temporary. I'll pay it all back soon." 3 years of mortgage payments. 3 years of helping my son-in-law maintain this lifestyle while he struggled to find steady work. 3 years of believing he was grateful, that he considered me family. "Did Sarah know what you really are? That you hate her family?" His mask slipped completely then. The polite pretense evaporated, leaving something ugly and entitled in its place. "Get off my property! And don't forget, the March payment is due tomorrow." Even now, even while discussing my dead daughter's funeral that I'd been excluded from, he had the audacity to remind me of money, as if I were nothing more than a convenient bank account, a resource to be exploited. I stood there on his pristine doorstep, surrounded by the manicured perfection of his borrowed lifestyle, and finally understood. Nicholas had never seen me as family. I was just the old man with the pension checks, the sucker who paid his bills while he played house with my daughter. The realization settled into my bones like winter cold. This wasn't grief talking, or shock, or some misunderstanding that could be smoothed over with time and conversation. This was who Nicholas really was. Nicholas crossed his arms over his chest, transforming himself into a human barrier. The expensive fabric of his robe caught the morning light, a visual reminder of everything my money had bought him while my daughter suffered alone in a hospital bed. Behind those crossed arms lay secrets I was only beginning to uncover. "Nicholas, I'm not leaving until I understand what happened here." My voice carried 40 years of union negotiations, the tone I'd used with stubborn foremen who thought they could intimidate me. "Where are Sarah's belongings? Her jewelry box, her photo albums, the quilt her grandmother made?" His jaw tightened. "Those things are being handled appropriately." Handled, like Sarah was a problem to be solved, rather than a woman who'd filled this house with laughter and love. I pressed forward, forcing him to step back slightly. "Show me her room. I want to see where she spent her final weeks. You can't just barge in here making demands." But his voice cracked on the last word, revealing the fear beneath his bluster. From the corner of my eye, I noticed more neighbors gathering. Mrs. Henderson from 2 houses down pretended to tend her flower bed while straining to hear every word. The mail carrier had slowed his route to an almost complete stop. "Can't I?" I moved closer to the doorway. "This house exists because I've been paying your mortgage. Every month for 3 years, $1,500 from my pension check to keep you in this neighborhood you can't afford." The color drained from Nicholas's face. We both knew the truth now. I held the financial strings that kept his perfect life intact. "That arrangement was temporary," he repeated, but the words sounded hollow even to him. "I'm between positions right now, but once the market improves—" "The market?" I laughed. But there was no humor in it. "Sarah died believing you were a success. Did she know you've been living off her father's money this whole time?" His free hand gripped the doorframe, knuckles white with tension. "Sarah understood that I was building something, that sometimes investments take time to—" "Stop lying." The command came out sharp enough to cut. "Sarah called me 2 months ago, worried about the bills. She said you'd been acting strange, staying out late, avoiding phone calls from creditors." Nicholas's coffee mug trembled in his grip. Coffee sloshed over the rim, staining his pristine robe, the first imperfection in his carefully maintained facade. "That's not—" "She didn't understand the complexities of my business ventures." "What business ventures? You've been unemployed for 8 months. The only income in this house was Sarah's salary and my mortgage payments." A dog walker had stopped completely now, no longer pretending to exercise her pet. The entire street seemed to hold its breath, waiting for whatever explosion was building between us. "Even if that were true," Nicholas said, his voice rising defensively, "Sarah was my wife, my responsibility, not yours." The possessiveness in his tone made my skin crawl. "Your responsibility? You let her die without calling her family. You buried her without letting me say goodbye. What kind of responsibility is that?" Something darker flickered across his features. "Maybe the kind that protects people from unnecessary drama." Sarah was tired, Lloyd. Tired of your intensity. Each word was chosen like a weapon, designed to inflict maximum damage. But 40 years in Detroit's auto plants had taught me to recognize bullies, and Nicholas was nothing more than a desperate man trying to maintain control through cruelty. "My intensity?" I stepped forward until we were nearly toe-to-toe. "You mean my love for my daughter? My desire to be part of her life?" "I mean your need to control everything, to make every situation about yourself." His voice grew sharper, more confident as he found his rhythm. "Sarah knew that if you came to the funeral, you'd take over, make speeches, demand special treatment, turn her death into the Lloyd Diaz show." The neighbors weren't even pretending to mind their own business anymore. They'd formed a loose semicircle around Nicholas's property, drawn by the spectacle of this breakdown in their perfect world. "You're rewriting history to justify what you did." My hands clenched into fists at my sides. "Sarah loved me. She called every week, visited every month until she got sick. Until I helped her see that those visits were obligations, not choices." Nicholas's smile was poison disguised as sympathy. "I freed her from the burden of managing your expectations." The accusation hung between us like smoke from a house fire. He was claiming credit for driving a wedge between me and Sarah, proud of isolating her from the people who'd loved her since birth. "And now she's gone," I said quietly. "And you've got no one left to manipulate except the old man who pays your bills." His smile faltered. "This conversation is over, Lloyd. You need to leave my property immediately." "Your property." I looked up at the house that my pension had helped purchase, at the perfect lawn maintained by services I'd unknowingly funded. $1,500 a month for 3 years. $54,000. That makes me more than just a visitor, doesn't it? Nicholas stepped back into his house, trying to close the door. But I'd seen enough, heard enough. The truth was finally clear. My daughter had died isolated and alone, cut off from her family by a man who saw her as nothing more than a meal ticket. "The March payment," I said slowly, my voice carrying new weight, "is due tomorrow." Fear flashed in his eyes, real fear, the kind that comes from suddenly realizing your safety net has strings attached. I turned and walked back toward my truck, leaving Nicholas standing in his doorway. Behind me, I could hear whispered conversations starting among the neighbors, the sound of a reputation beginning to crumble. My hands gripped the steering wheel as I stared through the windshield at Elmwood Cemetery's iron gates. 30 minutes of driving through Detroit's winter streets had done nothing to calm the storm in my chest. The dashboard clock read 6 p.m., and February dusk was settling over the city like a gray blanket. The engine ticked as it cooled, the only sound in the gathering darkness. Inside those gates lay the proof I couldn't bring myself to accept. My daughter, my Sarah, reduced to a mound of fresh earth and a temporary metal marker. No father should have to hunt for his child's grave like some stranger searching for directions. Cold air bit my face as I stepped out of the truck. My breath came out in visible puffs, each exhalation a ghost in the dim light. The cemetery stretched before me, rows upon rows of headstones disappearing into shadow. I walked slowly between the markers, my footsteps crunching on frost-covered grass. Some graves were ancient, their stones worn smooth by decades of Michigan winters. Others looked newer, with fresh flowers and small American flags left by families who remembered. The recent burial section lay toward the back, where the earth looked disturbed and raw. I moved methodically between the plots, reading names, searching for something I prayed I wouldn't find. Then I saw it, a mound of dark soil, still loose and uneven. No headstone yet, just a simple metal placard stuck into the ground at an angle, the kind of temporary marker funeral homes used until families could afford something permanent. Sarah Diaz Thompson, it read in plain black letters. My legs gave out. I dropped to my knees beside the grave, ignoring the cold wetness seeping through my pants. The earth was real under my hands, gritty, frozen, final. This wasn't some mistake or cruel joke. This was where they'd put my daughter while I sat in my kitchen, drinking coffee and wondering why no one had called. Sarah, baby girl. My voice came out as a whisper. I didn't get to say goodbye. The silence pressed against my ears. No response from the grave, no sign that she could hear me. Just the distant sound of traffic on 8 Mile Road and the rustle of bare branches in the wind. I touched the earth with my bare fingers, feeling the reality of it. 38 years since I'd first held her as a newborn, counted her tiny fingers, promised to protect her from everything that could hurt her. And when she needed me most, when the cancer was eating her alive, I wasn't there. He wouldn't let me say goodbye to you. The words came out louder now, angry and broken. How could he do that? How could anyone be so cruel? Streetlights began flickering on throughout the cemetery, casting long shadows between the headstones. I sat back on my heels, staring at that simple metal sign. Sarah Diaz Thompson. She'd kept my name even after marriage, hyphenated it so she'd always carry part of me with her. Nicholas had tried to erase that connection, tried to turn her death into his private affair, but she'd chosen to keep Diaz as part of her identity. Even in death, she was still my daughter. 38 years, I spoke to the grave as if she could hear me. And I wasn't there in your final minutes. A father should always be there. The cold was seeping into my bones now, but I couldn't leave. Not yet. This was the closest I'd been to Sarah since Christmas dinner, when she'd pushed food around her plate and complained about being tired. I'd thought it was work stress, the pressure of her legal practice. Now I understood she was already dying, and neither of us knew it. Cars passed occasionally on the road beyond the cemetery fence, their headlights sweeping across the graves. Normal people going about their normal evening routines, while I knelt beside my daughter's grave, trying to make sense of a world that had let her die alone. The security lights cast everything in harsh white relief. The neat rows of older headstones, the perfect grass between them, and the raw earth where Sarah lay. Her plot looked so temporary, so unfinished compared to the established graves surrounding it, as if even in death she remained modest and understated. I pulled myself to my feet, knees protesting after kneeling on frozen ground. My pants were soaked and dirty, but that seemed insignificant now. Everything seemed insignificant except the realization that I'd failed her when it mattered most. I should have been there. The promise came out quiet but firm. I should have known something was wrong. The wind picked up, carrying the scent of winter and the distant smell of car exhaust. I brushed dirt from my hands, then reached down to touch the metal marker one final time. The letters of her name felt cold and sharp under my fingertips. Walking back to my truck, I felt something shifting inside me. The disbelief was gone, burned away by the reality of frozen earth and temporary markers. What remained was harder, more focused. Nicholas had stolen my chance to say goodbye. He'd buried my daughter like she was his property, his private loss to manage. But Sarah would always be mine too, and he was about to learn what that meant. Morning fog hung over the Detroit River as I sat on the frozen bench at Belle Isle Park. The night had been endless, hours of staring at the ceiling, replaying every moment of yesterday's confrontations. By dawn, I knew I needed to visit the places where Sarah and I had been happy. My breath came out in white puffs as I looked across the water toward Canada. This bench, this exact spot, was where I'd taught her to ride a bicycle 30 years ago. 7 years old, pigtails flying, pure joy lighting up her face as she finally found her balance. "Remember how scared you were I'd let go of that bicycle?" I spoke to the empty air, half expecting to hear her laugh in response. The memory played out clearly. Sarah wobbling on training wheels that I'd secretly loosened, then removed entirely. Her terrified squeals turning to delighted shrieks when she realized she was riding solo. The way she'd pumped those little legs, determined to prove she could keep up with the older kids in the neighborhood. After an hour watching the river, I drove home through familiar streets that looked different somehow, as if yesterday's revelations had changed the color of everything. Back in my kitchen, I pulled out the photo albums I'd stored in the living room cabinet. 3 thick books chronicling Sarah's life from birth to last Christmas. I spread them across the table systematically, creating a timeline of memories. Baby Sarah in her hospital bassinet, wrinkled and perfect. Sarah at 3, covered in chocolate cake from her own birthday party. Sarah at 7, gap-toothed and proud beside her new bicycle. Each photo marked a moment when she'd been completely, purely happy. The childhood pictures showed her constant smile, the joy that had made her the center of every family gathering. Even as a teenager, when Karen went through her sullen phase, Sarah remained sunny and open. She'd brought friends home constantly, turning our modest house into the neighborhood gathering place. You were always bringing people together, I said to a photo of her high school graduation. Even then, you knew how to make everyone feel welcome. College photos showed her growing serious, focused on her law studies. But her smile remained genuine, especially in the pictures of us together. Father-daughter fishing trips to Belle Isle Pier. Sarah's wedding day. My arm linked through hers as I walked her down the aisle to Nicholas. That wedding photo stopped me cold. The way Nicholas looked at Sarah in the picture, possessive rather than loving, as if she was something he'd acquired rather than someone he'd chosen to share his life with. I turned the page and found our final Christmas photo from 2 months ago. Sarah sat at my kitchen table, wearing a green sweater that hung loose on her frame. She was picking at the dinner I'd spent all day preparing, claiming she wasn't hungry, the hollow look in her eyes that I'd attributed to work stress. "You were already sick then, weren't you?" I whispered to her image. "And he never told me." Looking at that final photograph, I could see what I'd missed. The way she pushed food around her plate, the careful way she moved as if her body hurt, the forced quality of her smile. The cancer was already consuming her, and I'd been too blind to notice. I stacked the photos back into neat chronological piles, but my hands shook with something that wasn't grief anymore. This was anger, pure and focused. Nicholas had known she was dying, had watched her waste away, and never once called to suggest I spend more time with her. The phone calls from those final months took on new meaning now. Sarah's voice getting thinner, more tired, her excuses for not visiting becoming more frequent. I'd respected her space, trusted that she'd reach out when she needed me. But she had reached out, hadn't she? In her own way, she'd been asking for help. And Nicholas had stood between us, filtering every conversation, controlling every interaction. I picked up the Christmas photo again. Sarah's wedding ring caught the camera flash, a thin gold band that looked too big for her finger. Even her hands had grown thin by then, though I hadn't noticed at the time. The kitchen felt too small suddenly, too full of memories and rage. I needed to talk to someone who understood betrayal, someone who'd known Sarah when she was young and full of life. My phone sat on the counter beside the scattered photographs. Marcus had been my friend for 30 years, through plant closures and divorces and the deaths of both our wives. If anyone would understand what I was feeling, what I was planning, it would be him. I reached for the phone, my finger hovering over his number. Once I made this call, once I put my thoughts into words, there would be no going back. Nicholas had made his choice when he buried my daughter without me. My finger hovered over Marcus's number for a long moment. The photographs spread across my kitchen table seemed to watch me. 38 years of Sarah's life, waiting for justice. 3 days had passed since I'd knelt beside her grave. 3 sleepless nights that had crystallized my thinking into sharp focus. I pressed the call button. "Lloyd?" Marcus's voice carried concern even in that single word. "Man, I heard about Sarah. I'm so sorry. I need to meet with you, Marcus, tonight if possible." "Of course. Motor City Tavern? I can be there in an hour." The familiar booth in the back corner of Motor City Tavern felt like sanctuary. Dim lighting, worn wooden surfaces, the comfortable smell of fried food and working-class conversation. Marcus had already claimed our usual spot, 2 beers waiting on the scarred table. This place understood men like us, retired auto workers who'd spent 40 years building things with our hands, men who knew the difference between loyalty and betrayal. "Tell me what happened," Marcus said simply. I started from the beginning. Karen's phone call, the confrontation with Nicholas, finding Sarah's grave alone in the winter darkness. Marcus listened without interruption, his weathered face growing darker with each detail. "Man, that's just terrible," he said when I finished. "How could he do such a thing? Sarah was family. He thinks I'm just some old fool who exists to pay his bills." I pulled out the mortgage papers I'd retrieved from my home safe that morning. 3 years of payments, Marcus. $54,000 to keep him in that fancy house. Marcus studied the documents, his mechanic's eyes noting every detail. "You co-signed for the whole amount?" Sarah asked me to help them get started. Said Nicholas was between jobs, but had great prospects. I laughed bitterly. Prospects? He's been unemployed for 8 months. The jukebox in the corner was playing old Motown. The Temptations singing about the way love used to be. The irony wasn't lost on me. Here I sat planning revenge while songs about better times filled the air. So what are you going to do about it? Marcus asked the question I'd been wrestling with for 3 days. He wants money. Let's see how long he lasts without it. Marcus set down his beer carefully. You sure about this? That's a serious step, cutting off his payments. Around us, other conversations continued. Men discussing overtime shifts and weekend plans. Normal concerns for people whose daughters were still alive. I envied them their simple problems. He betrayed my trust, Marcus. Worse than that, he betrayed Sarah's trust. She died believing she had a loving husband who would honor her family connections. And instead, she got a user who was spending her father's money while isolating her from everyone who loved her. Marcus understood. 30 years of friendship had taught us to read each other's silences, to know when support was needed rather than advice. This wasn't about money anymore. It was about justice. Nicholas needs to learn what happens when you bite the hand that feeds you. I organized the mortgage papers into a neat stack. The March payment is due in 10 days. He's expecting $1,500 to magically appear in his account, just like it has every month for 3 years. And instead, he's going to discover what financial independence actually costs. The tavern's atmosphere wrapped around us like an old coat, familiar, comfortable, filled with the understanding that came from shared experience. These were my people, men who'd worked hard and played fair, who understood that actions had consequences. Marcus raised his beer. To Sarah's memory, to justice, I replied. We drank in silence, each lost in our own thoughts. The jukebox had moved on to Stevie Wonder, singing about higher ground. Maybe that's what this was about, claiming the moral high ground that Nicholas had abandoned when he chose cruelty over compassion. You need any help with this? Marcus asked. Just knowing you understand is enough. This is something I have to do alone. The drive home took me through neighborhoods I'd known for decades, past the plant where Marcus and I had worked side by side for 20 years. The city had changed since those days, some areas improving while others declined, but the fundamental principles remained the same. You took care of family, you honored your commitments, and you didn't take advantage of people who trusted you. Nicholas had violated all of those principles. Back in my kitchen, I spread the mortgage documents across the table beside Sarah's photographs. Legal papers and family memories, the collision of business and emotion that had defined these past 3 years. Tomorrow I would visit the bank. I would begin the process of removing myself as co-signer, of making Nicholas fully responsible for his own debts. It would take time, legal procedures always did, but the March payment was under my complete control. That payment would never be made. I gathered the documents into neat stacks, organizing them by date and importance. Each paper represented a promise I'd made to help my daughter and her husband build a stable life. Promises Nicholas had exploited while slowly poisoning Sarah against her own family. The kitchen clock read nearly midnight. In 10 hours, the bank would open and my revenge would begin in earnest. Not the hot, immediate satisfaction of confrontation, but the cold, methodical destruction of the comfortable life Nicholas had built on my generosity. He wanted to be independent. He was about to get his wish. The reflection in my bedroom mirror showed a man ready for war. Dark suit pressed sharp, tie knotted with military precision, every detail calculated to project authority and respectability. This wasn't Lloyd, the grieving father, anymore. This was Lloyd, the businessman, armed with legal documents and righteous purpose. My home safe yielded its secrets readily. Mortgage papers, co-signer agreements, 3 years of payment records. Each document represented a piece of Nicholas's comfortable lie, and today I would begin dismantling it methodically. Downtown Detroit stretched before me as I drove through neighborhoods that had survived the city's worst years. Abandoned lots gave way to renovated buildings, testament to the kind of perseverance Nicholas would never understand. Men like him expected easy solutions, other people's money to solve their problems. The First National Bank building rose from Renaissance Center like a monument to legitimate power. Marble floors echoed my footsteps as I walked through the lobby, briefcase in hand, moving with the confidence of a man who'd made his decision and accepted its consequences. Mr. Diaz? The loan officer's nameplate read Jennifer Morrison, professional, competent, with the slightly wary look of someone who'd handled difficult financial situations before. You mentioned removing yourself as co-signer? I spread the documents across her mahogany desk with deliberate precision. My son-in-law's mortgage. I want complete withdrawal from all financial responsibility. She studied the papers, her expression growing concerned. Mr. Diaz, this is highly unusual. Mr. Thompson's income alone doesn't support continued payments. Without your guarantee, that's no longer my concern. The words felt clean, final. For 3 years I'd been Nicholas's safety net, the invisible foundation that kept his house of cards from collapsing. No more. Sir, I need to explain the consequences. Without your co-signature, if Mr. Thompson defaults, the bank will begin foreclosure proceedings immediately. I understand completely. She pulled out a thick folder of legal forms. This will require your signature in several places. Once processed, you'll have no legal obligation for the debt, but Mr. Thompson will receive immediate notification of the change. Perfect. Let Nicholas discover his new reality through official channels, stamped and sealed by institutional authority. No dramatic confrontations, no emotional appeals, just the cold machinery of finance crushing his assumptions. Another signature, another step, another victory. The embossed bank seal on my copies made everything official and irreversible. 3 years of mortgage payments, $54,000 of my pension money transformed from gift to business transaction and now terminated with prejudice. Mr. Diaz, are you certain about this decision? It seems rather sudden. I gathered my documents, stacking them neatly. My daughter died recently. Her husband chose to handle her funeral as a private affair. I'm simply extending him the same courtesy with his finances. Her expression softened with understanding. I'm sorry for your loss, so am I. But some losses teach valuable lessons about trust. Walking through those marble corridors with legal documents in hand, I felt a satisfaction I hadn't experienced since before Sarah's illness. The deep contentment of justice served through proper channels. No violence, no threats, just the systematic removal of unearned privilege. The elevator carried me down to street level, where Detroit's afternoon bustle continued unchanged. People hurried past on their way to jobs, appointments, responsibilities, the ordinary business of folks who paid their own bills and honored their commitments. Nicholas would receive his notification within 24 hours. Certified mail, return receipt requested, impossible to ignore or misinterpret. Then would come the phone calls, the panic, the desperate attempts at negotiation. But I was done negotiating. My truck started immediately, reliable as always. The drive home took me through Brightmoor, past houses where working people lived within their means, where handshake agreements meant something and family obligations weren't treated as business opportunities. The bank documents went into my safe beside Sarah's photograph, the Christmas picture where she looked so thin and tired. Every signature on those papers was a promise kept to her memory, proof that betraying Lloyd Diaz carried consequences Nicholas was about to discover. The March payment was due in 10 days. For the first time in 3 years, Nicholas's account would remain empty, his safety net removed without warning or apology. Justice had an address now, and it was written in official ink on institutional letterhead. The sound of certified mail hitting Nicholas's marble foyer echoed like a gunshot through his perfect house. I could picture him there, expensive loungewear, premium coffee growing cold, as he tore open the envelope that would shatter his comfortable illusions. 2 days later, my phone rang at exactly 8 a.m. Lloyd? What nonsense is this? Nicholas's voice carried the sharp edge of barely controlled panic. The bank says you withdrew from the loan agreement. I set down my newspaper deliberately, savoring the moment. 3 days had passed since my visit to First National. 3 days of anticipation building like pressure in a steam pipe. Yes, Nicholas, I'm no longer co-signer on your mortgage. Silence stretched between us, filled with the weight of financial reality crashing down on his assumptions. You can't do this. We had arrangements. Understandings. Our arrangements were based on my relationship with Sarah. She's gone. The desperation in his voice grew sharper with each word. But the house, the payments, I can't manage $1,500 a month on my own. Then perhaps you should have considered that before burying my daughter without telling me. Ring, Nicholas again. This time I let it go to voicemail, then listened to his recorded panic with cold satisfaction. The message rambled for 3 minutes, jumping between threats and pleading, as if words could somehow undo signed legal documents. The third call came during my lunch. I answered on the 5th ring, projecting calm control, while Nicholas spiraled further into desperation. Lloyd, please be reasonable. I can pay you back every penny. I just need time. Time was something Sarah needed. You didn't give her access to her family during her final weeks. That's not... She wanted privacy. I was protecting her. You were protecting yourself from having to explain why you'd been living off her father's money while pretending to be successful. Each phone call revealed another layer of Nicholas's desperation, like peeling back the veneer of respectability to expose the entitled, manipulative core beneath. His tactics shifted with each conversation, confusion giving way to pleading, pleading to anger, anger to barely concealed threats. By the 4th call, his mask had slipped completely. You're destroying my life, old man. Everything I've worked for. Worked for, I laughed, genuinely amused. When did you work, Nicholas? Between unemployment checks and my mortgage payments? I have prospects, opportunities, you have bills, $1,500 worth, due in 6 days. The fifth call came at 2 a.m. Nicholas's voice slurred with alcohol and exhaustion. This isn't over, Lloyd. You think you can just cut me off like some deadbeat? I know people. I have connections. Then call them. Ask for $1,500. See how many of your connections value your friendship at mortgage payment prices. Marcus had warned me this phase would be ugly. Desperate men do stupid things, he'd said over our beers at Motor City Tavern. They lash out, make threats, try anything to maintain control. But I'd expected the desperation. What I hadn't anticipated was how much I'd enjoy Nicholas's complete breakdown, the satisfaction of watching his entitled assumptions crumble under financial pressure. The sixth call never came. Instead, on March 5th, I heard the screech of expensive tires in my driveway. Through my kitchen window, I watched Nicholas slam his BMW door with enough force to crack the frame. His face had changed in the 5 days since the bank's notification. Unshaven, hollow-eyed, wearing yesterday's clothes like armor against a world that suddenly demanded he pay his own way. He stormed up my front walk with the desperate energy of a man who'd run out of options. This wouldn't be another phone conversation, another attempt to negotiate from the safety of distance. This was the moment when words would give way to something more dangerous, when Nicholas's desperation would demand satisfaction regardless of consequences. I watched him approach my front door, fist already raised, and felt no fear. Only the cold certainty that my son-in-law was about to prove exactly what kind of man he'd always been. Nicholas's fist hammered against my front door like thunder, each blow echoing through the house with desperate fury. I'd been expecting this moment since watching him storm up my walkway, his face twisted with the rage of a man who'd finally run out of people to blame. I opened the door calmly, meeting his wild eyes with steady composure. "Nicholas, because of you, I'm losing everything." He stepped forward aggressively, invading the threshold of my home. "House, credit, everything I've built, as if 3 years of my pension payments constituted his personal construction project. You chose this path when you decided to betray family trust." His expensive clothes hung wrinkled on his frame, 5 days of panic having stripped away the polished veneer he'd worn like armor. This was Nicholas without pretense, desperate, entitled, dangerous. "Shut up, old man. You always interfered in our lives, always trying to control Sarah." Mrs. Patterson emerged onto her front porch, ostensibly checking her mailbox but clearly monitoring the confrontation. Across the street, Mr. Johnson paused his yard work, rake in hand, watching with the careful attention of a man who'd lived long enough to recognize trouble. "I loved my daughter. You isolated her from people who cared. I protected her from your manipulations." Nicholas's voice cracked with hysteria. "She was finally free of your constant demands for attention." The accusation hung in the cold March air like smoke. Around us, my neighborhood continued its quiet afternoon rhythm, but I could feel eyes watching from multiple windows. This would be remembered, discussed, evaluated by people who understood the difference between family loyalty and financial exploitation. Sarah called me every week until she got sick. Then suddenly she was too tired for conversation. Because she was dying. Because she had real problems instead of your constant need for validation. Nicholas raised his hand, finger pointed at my chest like a weapon. His whole body trembled with rage and desperation. A man who'd discovered that financial dependency carried obligations he wasn't prepared to honor. "Now you've crossed a line, Nicholas." "I've crossed a line?" His laugh carried no humor. "You cut off my mortgage payments. You're trying to steal my house. Your house that I've been paying for." The words hit him like physical blows. His face contorted with fury. And in that moment I saw something shift, desperation transforming into violence, civilized pretense abandoning him completely. Nicholas charged. The shove caught me off balance, his hands hitting my chest with surprising force. I stumbled backward, my spine connecting hard with the porch railing. Pain shot through my ribs as the wooden rail dug into my back, and for a moment the world tilted sideways. I fell. The porch boards were cold and rough under my palms as I caught myself, 65 years of age, making the impact harder than it should have been. Nicholas stood over me, breathing heavily, his eyes wild with the satisfaction of finally expressing his rage physically. "This is just the beginning if you don't fix this." His voice carried the threat of greater violence, the promise that my age and his desperation made for a dangerous combination. "Lloyd," Mrs. Patterson's voice cut through the moment like a blade. "You all right over there?" The spell broke. Nicholas stepped back, suddenly aware of the witnesses surrounding us. Mr. Johnson had abandoned his rake and started walking toward my property, his expression grim. Other neighbors appeared on porches and behind curtains, drawn by the commotion. I pulled myself upright slowly, deliberately, refusing to show the pain radiating through my ribs. My shirt was torn, where the railing had caught it, a scrape visible on my forearm, physical evidence of Nicholas's assault, witnessed by half my block. "Get off my property," I said quietly, but loud enough for the gathering witnesses to hear. Nicholas looked around wildly, finally noticing the audience his violence had attracted. In Brightmoor, neighborhood disputes were common, but attacking an elderly man on his own porch crossed lines that demanded response. "This isn't over," he hissed, but the threat sounded hollow now, undermined by the reality of witnesses and consequences. He stalked back to his BMW, slamming the door hard enough to echo off the surrounding houses. The engine roared to life with unnecessary aggression, tires squealing as he reversed out of my driveway with reckless speed. Standing in my own front yard, watching my daughter's widower drive away after physically attacking me, I felt something crystallize inside. Not hatred, but the cold certainty that justice demanded more than just financial consequences. Mrs. Patterson approached slowly, concern written across her weathered face. "Lloyd, honey, you need me to call somebody? Police? Ambulance?" I touched my ribs gingerly, testing for serious damage. Pain, definitely, but nothing that wouldn't heal. "I'm fine, Mrs. Patterson. Thank you for watching out for me." But I wasn't fine. None of this was fine. Nicholas had just shown me exactly who he was when pressure revealed his true character. A man who would physically attack his dead wife's elderly father rather than accept responsibility for his own failures. The bathroom mirror reflected a man marked by violence but not broken by it. Purple bruises spread across my ribs like storm clouds, while the scrape on my forearm had scabbed over during the night. I photographed each injury methodically, documenting Nicholas's assault with the same precision I'd once used to catalogue factory equipment defects. Evidence. That's what I needed now, not revenge. My first call went to Jim Morrison, 20-year veteran of Detroit PD, who'd grown up 3 blocks from my house. We'd known each other since high school, before life took us in different directions. Him to law enforcement, me to the assembly line. "Jim, it's Lloyd Diaz. I need a favor from an old friend." "Lloyd, haven't heard from you in months. What's going on?" I explained the situation carefully. Sarah's death, Nicholas's betrayal, the physical assault 2 days ago. Jim listened without interruption, his cop instincts processing information as I spoke. "You document the injuries? Photographed everything this morning." "Good. Witnesses?" "Mrs. Patterson saw the whole thing. Mr. Johnson across the street too." 8 days of methodical investigation followed that first call. Marcus became my research partner, spreading financial documents across his dining room table like pieces of a complex puzzle. 3 years of mortgage payments had generated a paper trail that revealed Nicholas's true character more clearly than any confrontation could. "Look at this," Marcus said, pointing to a tax return from 2 years ago. Nicholas reported $18,000 in annual income. I pulled out the mortgage application from the same year, but here he claimed $45,000 to qualify for the loan. Another document, another lie, another crime. The pattern emerged gradually. Nicholas had been systematically defrauding multiple agencies, underreporting income to minimize taxes while overstating it to secure credit. My mortgage payments had enabled him to maintain a lifestyle completely divorced from his actual earnings. Thursday afternoon found us at Murphy's Diner downtown, meeting with Tom Bradley, former colleague from the UAW who'd transitioned to working with federal tax investigators. The restaurant's vinyl booths and fluorescent lighting provided the perfect anonymous setting for sensitive conversations. "This documentation could support criminal charges if properly verified," Tom said, reviewing the folders I'd brought. "Tax fraud, loan fraud, potentially more. How long would an investigation take?" "Months, normally, but if you could get him to admit wrongdoing on record." The idea crystallized immediately. Nicholas was desperate, panicked, looking for any way to restore his financial stability. That desperation could become his downfall. "You sure this plan will work?" Marcus asked, as we photocopied documents at the local print shop. "I have evidence of his tax fraud spanning 3 years. He's committed multiple felonies." "How did you find all this?" "When you pay someone's bills, you notice inconsistencies." Nicholas thought I was just a convenient bank account, but I kept every receipt, every statement, every record. The abandoned Ford plant on 8 Mile Road provided the perfect location for what I had planned. Empty, isolated, but accessible to law enforcement when the time came. I'd arranged everything carefully. Jim would coordinate with federal investigators, positioning them nearby but out of sight until my signal. By March 15th, every detail was prepared, evidence organized chronologically, authorities briefed on the situation, recording equipment tested and ready. Nicholas had no idea that his victim had transformed into his prosecutor. The final piece required the most delicate touch, convincing Nicholas to meet me without arousing suspicion. His desperation would work in in my favor, his need for reconciliation overriding any caution about my motives. I picked up my phone and dialed his number, knowing he'd answer on the first ring. Desperation made men predictable. "Lloyd?" His voice carried pathetic hope, the sound of a drowning man reaching for any lifeline. "Nicholas, we need to talk, face to face." My watch showed 3:00 p.m. as I arranged manila folders across the rusted workbench inside the abandoned Ford plant. Afternoon sunlight streamed through broken windows, illuminating dust particles that danced like memories in the stale air. This factory had once employed thousands, men like me who'd built honest livings with their hands. Today, it would witness the fall of a man who'd built nothing but lies. The recording device Jim had provided sat hidden beneath my jacket, a small weight against my chest that felt heavier than conscience itself. Outside, federal investigators waited in unmarked vehicles, ready to move on my signal. A simple wave through the factory's main window. Nicholas's BMW pulled into the lot at exactly 3:30, tires crunching over broken glass and discarded metal. Through the doorway, I watched him approach nervously, his expensive clothes looking out of place against the industrial decay surrounding us. "Lloyd?" His voice echoed through the empty space as he stepped inside. "Where's the money? You promised to fix the loan situation." I gestured to the evidence folders spread before me like accusations made manifest. "I brought you here to show what happens to those who betray family trust." "What is all this?" He moved closer, squinting at the documents in the dim light. "Tax returns, mortgage applications, bank statements. 3 years of your lies documented in official ink." Nicholas picked up the first folder, his face changing from hope to confusion as he recognized his own fraudulent signatures. "These are private documents. You had no right." "I had every right. Every mortgage payment I made gave me access to your financial records. Did you think I wouldn't notice the discrepancies?" The second folder contained loan applications where he'd inflated his income by 300%. The third showed tax returns where he'd underreported the same earnings. Basic fraud, documented and witnessed. "This proves nothing," Nicholas said, but his voice wavered with growing panic. "It proves you committed systematic fraud against federal and state agencies. Multiple felonies, Nicholas. Each document signed and dated." He stepped backward, finally understanding the trap I'd constructed around him. "You can't prove intent. These could be mistakes. Mistakes spanning 3 years. Mistakes that coincidentally maximized your benefits while minimizing your obligations." The sound of approaching vehicles rumbled through the factory walls. Nicholas's head snapped toward the main window, where the first unmarked car was pulling into view. "You set me up. You lying old fool." I raised my hand toward the window, the predetermined signal Jim and I had arranged. More cars appeared, federal investigators emerging with the purposeful movement of professionals executing a planned operation. "No, Nicholas, you destroyed yourself when you chose to steal and deceive. I simply documented your crimes." "This isn't legal. You entrapped me." "I recorded your admissions while presenting evidence of your documented fraud. Everything by the book." The factory doors burst open as agents streamed inside, voices calling out identification and instructions. Nicholas tried to run, but the space offered no escape routes, just like the financial trap he'd built around himself with 3 years of systematic deception. "Nicholas Thompson, you're under arrest for federal tax fraud and bank fraud." The lead agent's voice carried absolute authority as handcuffs clicked around Nicholas's wrists. "You have the right to remain silent." Watching his son-in-law being led away in handcuffs from the same type of factory where Lloyd had spent 30 years building honest living, I felt the circle of justice finally complete. Not revenge, justice. Systematic, documented legal justice served through proper channels. "Mr. Diaz, we'll need your statement and evidence for the official record," Agent Rodriguez said, approaching with professional courtesy. "Everything's organized chronologically in those folders." 3 years of documented fraud." Nicholas's protests echoed off the factory walls as they escorted him toward the waiting vehicles. "This is harassment, age discrimination. He's lying about everything." But the evidence spoke louder than his denials. Official documents, signed forms, systematic patterns of deception that would convince any jury of his guilt. Standing alone in the factory doorway, I watched the convoy of police cars disappear down 8 Mile Road, taking Nicholas toward the consequences he'd spent 3 years earning. The abandoned building fell silent again, dust settling back into its eternal dance through broken windows. Sarah's memory was finally protected. The morning newspaper lay folded beside my coffee cup, its headline announcing what I'd known for 2 days. "Local man arrested for tax fraud. Federal investigators uncover 3-year scheme." Nicholas's photograph stared up from the front page, the same entitled expression he'd worn when discussing my mortgage payments. Justice delivered through official channels felt different from revenge, cleaner, more permanent. I folded the paper carefully and drove to the corner market, selecting fresh white lilies for Sarah's grave. The elderly Korean woman behind the counter recognized me. I'd been buying flowers here since my wife's death 15 years ago. For your daughter again? She asked gently. Yes, but today's different. Today I have good news to share. Elmwood Cemetery looked different in the afternoon light. The permanent granite headstone had been installed since my last visit. Sarah Diaz Thompson, carved in elegant letters that would weather decades of Michigan seasons. No more temporary metal marker. This was final. Dignified, appropriate for the woman she'd been. I knelt beside the grave, arranging the lilies carefully against the headstone. My knees protested the position, but some conversations required proximity. Justice is done, baby girl. Nicholas can't use your memory anymore. The words came easily, naturally, without the desperate edge that had marked my earlier visits. This wasn't grief talking. This was completion. He lost everything. House, job, reputation. The foreclosure starts next week. Federal prison after that, most likely. I touched the granite surface, feeling its solid permanence, just like he deserved for what he did to us. A cardinal landed on nearby headstone, bright red against grey stone. Sarah had always loved cardinals, claimed they were messengers from people who'd gone ahead. Probably coincidence, but I chose to see it as approval. Now I can move forward knowing I protected your honor. Your father kept his promises. The drive home took me through neighborhoods I'd traveled for 65 years, past the plant where I'd worked, the school Sarah had attended, the church where I'd walked her down the aisle to marry a man I'd thought would cherish her. My kitchen welcomed me with familiar silence, but the tension that had filled this space since February was gone. No more anger poisoning the air, no more plans for revenge consuming my thoughts, just the quiet satisfaction of a man who'd fulfilled his obligations to family and honor. I prepared a simple dinner, grilled cheese sandwich and tomato soup, and ate it slowly, savoring flavors that had been lost during weeks of consuming meals without tasting them. Food had meaning again when it wasn't fuel for anger. Evening found me in my favorite chair, Sarah's photographs arranged on the side table, not shrines to loss anymore, but celebrations of a life lived fully and loved completely. The Christmas picture that had once showed me her hidden illness now revealed her strength, smiling through pain, protecting others from her suffering. You can rest easy now, I told her image. Your father kept his word. The house settled around me with comfortable sounds, familiar creaks and whispers of a structure that had weathered 47 years of my occupancy. Tomorrow would bring new routines, new purposes, new ways to honor Sarah's memory without seeking vengeance for her betrayal. Nicholas would serve his sentence in federal prison, his house foreclosed, his reputation destroyed by his own documented crimes. Not because I'd sought revenge, but because justice demanded consequences for systematic fraud and betrayal of trust. I turned off the living room lights and headed toward bed, carrying no burden except pleasant fatigue. For the first time since Sarah's death, I would sleep without anger, without plans, without the weight of unfinished business pressing against my chest. The photograph on my nightstand showed Sarah at age 8, gap-toothed and joyful beside her new bicycle. That's how I would remember her, not as cancer's victim or Nicholas's widow, but as my daughter who'd trusted me to catch her when she fell. Justice served, honor restored, peace achieved. If you like this story, please like this video, subscribe to the channel, and share your impressions of this story in the comments. To listen to the next story, click on the box on the left. Thank you for watching.